Within the Chaos Space Marine faction, each of the 4 Chaos Gods has their own archetypal champion, that being split between a specific Chaos Space Marine and their Primarch. And both of these 2 champions per god represent different aspects of the god that they serve. In the case of Nurgle, where Mortarion represents Nurgle's toughness and resilience, Typhus represents the more quiet and manipulative side of the Plague God, one that is not seen quite too often. But even before Typhus was a firm devotee of the Plague God, he was quite the schemer. Not diabolical like Erebus by any means, but definitely someone who has their own goals and will subtly make it so that they will achieve what they will desire, regardless of the consequences. But before the chosen champion of Nurgle would lay siege to countless worlds, Typhus was known then as Callus Typhon. Born on the world of Barbarus, he was quite unique from the start. Born from a human woman and a Barbaran overlord, he would become something known to many on the world as a half-breed, and as such, he was seen as little more than a mutant or a monster, and it would not take long for tragedy to strike the young Typhon, as his mother, despite due to no fault of her own, would be killed by the members of his local village. And as such, Typhon would run away, spending most of his early childhood wandering the toxic wasteland of his homeworld. During this period, however, he would be plagued, no pun intended, by many ailments and mental abnormalities. Visions, objects would crack or shatter in response to his emotions, and he had no idea why this was. Well, the simple answer is that he was a psyker. Due to the nature of the Barbaran overlords being psykers, the blood that ran through his veins was lingered with properties he would not understand for many years. But then one faithful day, he would meet his future friend and leader, Mortarion. Soon after he betrayed his overlord father, 𝐀𝐦𝐦𝐿. The young Typhon would help his future Primarch, and as a result, the 2 of them would begin to form small bands of rebels and militias in an attempt to topple the regime that had ruled the world with an iron fist. This would go on for many years, with many successful campaigns culminating in the final battle between Mortarion and his father. And in the aftermath of the Emperor of Mankind's kill-stealing, members of his militia army would follow Mortarion into the skies to become part of the 14th Space Marine Legion. Typhon would pass any and all tests that the Legion would throw at him, his years of experience making the trials far easier than it would have been for most. However, despite his status as a psyker, Mortarion would quickly abandon the use of the Librarius, as due to his father being a psyker and encountering various warp anomalies on the planet, anything vaguely psychic related was a big no-no, both for Mortarion and his Legion, meaning that despite Typhus having such potent abilities, he was forced to suppress and hide them just as much here as he had on his homeworld. The Great Crusade would be marred with many battles, many of which were knockdown drag-out fights that left everything on the worlds they conquered to scrap. Typhon, despite not being first captain of the Legion at the time, was quite important to Mortarion, and was a voice his Primarch often asked counsel of. Typhon would fight almost any possible enemy, and would hone his skills more and more, both as a warrior and as a leader. However, his more manipulative side, one that had not been seen since his time on Barbarus, would begin to appear. During the events of the Zariman campaign, a war against a band of human rebels that saw the Death Guard, Luna Wolves, and a force of Dark Angels led by Luther, Typhon's eyes would be opened. An old woman would briefly touch Typhus, and due to her psychic nature, and his own, Typhus would receive visions. He'd become aware of the great powers, the grace they could grant, and for the first time, he had a purpose outside of warfare that he never knew was possible. From this moment on, Typhus would pledge himself to Nurgle, being the second Astartes next to Erebus to fall prey to the purview of chaos. His newfound favor with the Plague God granted him the ability to manipulate his way into becoming first captain of the Legion, and this position would allow him to shuffle people around, demote or send captains on suicide missions, and he would slowly put people around him he thought he could use or could convert to a secret cause. In many ways, he'd be successful at this, with 𝐀𝐦𝐿𝐴 becoming captain of the Second Company being a perfect example, but he would even attempt to use this type of sway to convert the likes of 𝐀𝐦𝐿𝐴 to his side. Needless to say, for the most part, Typhon was ready and willing to do anything and everything he could to enable his own desires to spread the plague and faith that Nurgle could provide. Combined with his now secret but very prominent lack of loyalty to his Primarch, he was just sitting and waiting for the opportunity to do so. So when the legions of the Sons of Horus, Emperor's Children, World Eaters, and Death Guard were summoned to 𝐼𝐴𝐻 III to start the beginnings of what would become the Horus Heresy, this was the moment that Typhon was waiting for. While most of the loyalists would be sent to battle on the surface of 𝐼𝐻 III, Typhon would send both 𝐿𝐴𝐿𝐴 and 𝐷𝐴𝐿𝐴 to man the starship the 𝐌𝐮𝐬𝐬𝐿𝐴. A mixture of loyalists and traitors, there was a palpable tension between both groups even before the treachery of Horus and the 3 other Primarchs was found. 𝐀𝐦𝐦𝐤, after being informed by Emperor's children Captain Saul Tarvitz, would take control of the ship and have it flee towards Terra. Despite Typhon's failure to stop 𝐀𝐦𝐤's escape, it was no matter, as it was now time to begin to put his long-term ambitions into play. The Legion would split in half, one side of the Legion being led by Mortarion, and the other by Typhon. And while the main bulk of the Death Guard led by Mortarion were to participate in some of the more well-known battles of the Heresy, Typhon would lead a campaign against the Dark Angels for most of the war. But all the while, his scheming and influence would grow, and his devotion to Nurgle would grow stronger with each passing day. So when both halves of the Legion would reunite in order to begin the siege at Terra, Typhon was very different. Mortarion, despite knowing his friend for all those years, felt something was off, and it did not help that odd things kept happening, all of them surrounding Typhon, from one of his Astartes being unusually sick and reanimating from death, to Typhon executing all of the navigators in the fleet all at once, due to them supposedly relaying information back to 𝐚𝐽𝐽𝐻. The situation for the Death Guard fleet would become dire. However, Typhon would reveal his status as a Psyker to his Primarch, and would offer to lead the fleet to Terra. Seeing no other choice, Mortarion would elect for this, which would be a terrible mistake, as Typhon drove the fleet through the warp into the clutches of Nurgle, but not before mutating and changing completely, as during Typhon's duel with a now mutated and rotten Captain 𝐀𝐦𝐽𝐽, Typhon would die during the duel, but Typhon would resurrect, now being host to the Destroyer Plague. Typhon's name would now be Typhus, his name given to him by the Plague God, and would become the preferred champion of Nurgle. The rest of the Legion of Mortarion would follow suit, either willingly or unwillingly. It did not matter. Typhon's plan had worked. His deception, although wrought with complexities and a lot of nuances, was successful, despite how hard it was to put into practice. And now, the fleet was set for Terra. The opening siege was devastating. Typhon, however, would begin despite his Primarch, and his open contempt for Mortarion would become more extreme as the siege would go on, and despite how effective his command was, and how devastating he was specifically in various spaceport battles, it did not change the fact that Typhon's more individualistic tendencies would start to rear their head. And after the failed assault on the Astronomicon in an attempt to prevent the Warp Light to allow the Ultramarines fleet to approach Terra, the entire siege would collapse, and the Death Guard would withdraw. After the siege, the Legion was largely left to be ran by Typhus, as Mortarion spent 99% of the time in the war participating in the Great Game, often at Nurgle's behest. Unlike many of the other legions, though, the Death Guard never shattered into various warbands. Instead, the various groups all served a larger whole, and would rally whenever the call came down. And during 999M41, that call would come. Abaddon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade would be the biggest assault the Chaos Forces would ever attempt up until that point. The Death Guard would be responsible for acting on two fronts, acting at a small scale to prepare for the invasion of the Ultramar Segmentum, much to Typhus's chagrin, and the assault on the Agren Sector. It was here where Typhus's manipulative tendencies come to a head. You see, within many of the known figureheads within the Chaos Space Marine legions, Typhus is easily one of the most subversive, and funnily enough, ambitious individuals that Chaos has at its disposal, which may sound a bit counterintuitive given Nurgle's penchant for stagnancy and complacence, but those ideals are more on the physical and ideological spectrum. When push comes to shove, Chaos is, well, chaotic, ever-changing, and even within the Pantheon, many gods will exemplify certain aspects of other gods, even if that goes against what they typically represent. So, when you have someone who, even before Chaos, was a manipulative, posturing individual, and they are drawn to your scent, well, that's an asset you can use. And that type of asset is the type of person who can cause an entire sector to see the worst fight in the galaxy it had ever seen up until that point, which says a lot considering how bad the battle for 𝐀𝐦𝐻 itself was. The conquest and destruction of the Agren Sector was so bad that it is still rendered entirely uninhabitable, and that would be the case even if the Great Rift had not been unleashed. The strategic spread of cults, ranging from large military groups to local gangs, were used in their entirety, and the constant deployment of space hulks just being thrown all over the place was only the tip of the iceberg in regards to Typhus's manipulation and connections. The resulting battle would see some of the worst chaos corruption en masse since the Siege of Terra, and if it were not for the following events, this would still not be as impressive as it was, as the Plague Wars were not only Typhus's greatest challenge, but also something he dreaded. Typhus did not care for conquering the sector the way Mortarion wanted. Mortarion wanted to topple the now resurrected Reboot 𝐀𝐻, but Typhus did not see this as a worthwhile endeavor. Ultramar should be a target, but not just to kill the resurrected 13th Primarch. But despite Typhus's favor, he was ordered by a demon of Nurgle that this was the will of the god, and now he had to do what Mortarion wanted. And as such, he fell in line. But after the initial push was thwarted and the battle for Parmenio went horribly, the Plague Gods saw no use for this campaign. The forces were pulled back, and despite how much Mortarion was willing to throw everything at the Segmentum, Typhus would take a majority of the Legion with him, leaving Mortarion to nearly die at the hands of an Emperor of Mankind empowered 𝐀𝐻. As of now, Typhus has continued to just wander as he had before, spreading the faith of Nurgle where he saw fit, and continuing to serve the Plague God with reverence. He is comfortable with his existence, and would travel wherever the winds of chaos would take him. If you want to learn more about Typhus, read the Mortarion Primarch novel, The Buried Dagger, Flight of the 𝐼𝐚𝐻, Lords of Silence has him showing up a little bit, but the area where he shows up is actually quite good, the Plague War trilogy, Typhus, Herald of the Plague God, which is a pretty good job characterizing him, Warlords of the Dark Millennium, Typhus, which those Warlords of the Dark Millennium books are quite good. I'm surprised not a lot of people talk about them. They're good. You should go read them. And Warhawk. Thank you all very much for watching. I really do appreciate it and your patience with the new upload schedule and everything else. As a side note, I am uploading older gaming adjacent content to the other channels. If you want to go check that out, there's a link in the description. And thank you all very much to the channel members for supporting me. I really do appreciate it. And if you're interested in becoming a member, please consider becoming one. I really would appreciate it. Thank you all very much for watching. Have a great night.